Do you struggle with masking fluid or liquid frisket? Do you find it tempting to reach for the white paint to get those lights into your watercolor? Hello, I'm Tim Wilmot, a watercolor painter and a tutor producing videos and online workshops to help you improve your painting. In this step-by-step demo, I'll show you how easy it is to achieve light in your painting without using masking fluid and using instead a few watercolor techniques like negative painting and some dry brush strokes. So put that masking fluid away. You may not need it. The scene, the subject of my painting, is this beach scene. We're looking into the light. It's a little bit of a contre jour, as they say, so we've got lots of silhouetted shapes to contend with, to work with. This is the Playa de las Canteras, if I pronounce that correctly, on the island of Gran Canaria. It's the main city there, Las Palmas, and you've got this lovely beach going around a bay, quite a sheltered beach. We're looking at this evening or late afternoon, evening light here, some stormy clouds coming over, and we've got this lovely scene looking into the light. And if I just zoom in a little bit, look at this lovely area of light here. Bit of glistening on the tops of the sea, and some boats on this sandy beach. Lots of figures. If I just zoom back out, and a scene like this where you've got quite a lot of different things going on, figures, boats. There's this building on the right-hand side here. You've got to think, well, what am I going to leave out? What am I going to change? What am I going to move around? And so, well, the focus is this light, this lovely light coming into the scene, and the assortment of boats here are rather like this seated figure, but this guy is probably pointing the wrong direction from a composition point of view. I'd like to have him looking into the picture. Boats are good. We've got lots of little bits of light hitting the gunnels, the tops of the boats there. Nice dark shadows as well from these boats. Yes, and a few figures. We'll have a few figures in the scene to make it a little bit more realistic as a beach scene. And then there's the surface of the beach. Lots of little depressions where people have been walking on this dry, soft sand. So a nice scene. Don't use masking fluid. Don't use liquid frisket. Very limited use of white paint. I'll come to that at the end. So let's see how we get on. First step, do the drawing, and I'm using a soft pencil. So I've got fairly dark lines to follow with, and I don't spend an awful lot of time on the initial drawing. I paint in a loose style. I think if you spend a lot of time on the drawing, then that's going to make you a little bit tighter in your style. So don't spend an awful lot of time doing the outline sketch. But here I want to get in these boat shapes. So there's one on the left, and I'm thinking about getting in about 3 or 4 boats. So one in the middle there, and a larger boat in front of it. By the way, if you want to keep seeing my reference photo as I paint this demo, then if you're on a PC or tablet, open up another tab in your browser, go to this same video URL, same video link, and in that tab, pause it on the opening few minutes where I show you a picture full screen. Or better still, and excuse the plug, you can join my Patreon club, www.patreon.com/TimWilmot, where I share high-resolution images of my paintings and set regular monthly projects and provide video critiques back to you. So 4 boats then in the scene, and this seated figure, which I'm changing the direction of the figure from the photograph. So this guy is looking into the scene rather than away, looking into the middle of the scene rather than looking away, which it would look all right, but I think it looks better having this figure looking in towards the middle of the scene. Let's have another figure here. Perhaps walking into this scene or away from the scene, not quite so sure at the moment. Another figure there behind the boat. Always a good way of hiding figures behind a boat. You don't need to bother with the legs or feet then. A lot easier. Now, over here on the right hand side, I want to, there's lots of different objects on this beach, so I think I'll have something here in front of that right hand boat, and we'll grab another little slice of light on the top of that object against the darker background of the boat. So just finish off these boats, get them looking fairly realistic, and sometimes an indication of the outline of the shadows as well, as I've done with the middle boat. We've got the shoreline, just some minimal details inside the boat. I've just also done the background hills. This bay sweeps around to the left, and the city it goes all the way around to the other side. I think actually it's the 5th largest city in Spain, but it's not actually on mainland Spain. It's on this island, way out in the Atlantic, one of the Canary Islands. It's actually one of the largest cities in Spain. Next step then, after I'm happy with the drawing and I've got the main shapes, I've got my main figures, I've got it in my own mind where the light's going to be, sort of in the middle of the scene, right across the sea. The next step is laying down a wash, where I'm going to cover nearly all of the paper, apart from those areas that are going to be kept light. So I'm not going to be using masking fluid or masking tape or liquid frisket. I'm just really going to be doing some careful painting around. Now, in this scene, beyond that light area on the sea, there's a very soft edge with the clouds. There's some clouds coming in, or some sort of storm coming in from the right. And I want a soft edge on the top of that. So what I'm doing here is laying down near the horizon some clear water, and I'm going to drop the sky into that. It's not ultra wet, but you can see there's still a little bit of a shine on the paper. Now I'm using watercolor paper here, a good quality watercolor paper. This is Saunders Waterford. There are other brands as well, but this is cotton based, so that water is going to soak in, but it's going to keep damp for a long time, and it gives me longer time to play with the watercolor. Now my board has a slight slope on it, maybe about 10 or 15 degrees, so the paint is going to travel down a little bit as I paint down. Now I'm starting in the right hand corner but coming down to that damp patch, and with this sort of stormy clouds, we've got these bands of clouds, light and dark, sort of very soft transition from a dark area to a light area as I'm coming down towards the horizon. So doing this quite quickly. Here's a darker area, bit thicker paint. I'm using a soft mop brush here for this stage. Now as I'm coming down into that damp area, you'll see that I'm going to get a soft edge. So it's the impression of maybe a little bit of light rain coming into the distance. And also over the city to the left, around the bay. It's quite a soft transition to between the rooftops and the sky. So I want to try and render that in the watercolor as well. What I'm doing now are the buildings of the city that is mainly on the left hand side, and it goes down to the water's edge. Just really a warm touch of, well, initially a little bit of light red, a bit of cadmium orange, and now mixing up a darker mix of a bit of burnt sienna, burnt umber, a little bit of neutral tint. My palette, if I tell you what colours I'm using, which is pretty much, if you've seen any of my other demos, pretty much the same. I don't change things too much, but from the top, neutral tint, which I just touched there, neutral tint, burnt umber, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, viridian green, cobalt green, cerulean blue, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, then a bright red, Windsor red, and a light red, cadmium orange, and lemon yellow. What I'm doing now is just dropping in, I'm doing a little bit of wet in wet, just dropping in some darker colours there. There's no real hard edges really in the distance, apart from on the extreme left side where we can see the buildings are closer to us, so we'll have some harder edges in there. So in the middle, I've just dropped in a little bit of a darker area just to represent the far side, the mountains in the distance. And now mixing up a little bit of sea colour, which is cerulean blue, a little bit of cobalt green. Mop brush again. This is a very important part of the painting. I've got to get this right. This paper has a fairly rough surface. It's not the ultra rough paper, it's cold press, so it's medium texture. But I'm using a mop brush here, not too much paint on the brush, and just lightly dragging the brush across into that area from left to right. So as I drag the brush in towards the middle, there's less paint on the brush. So we're going to get the paper showing through. We're exploiting there you are, just turn the brush on the side. When I turn the brush on the side, the paint, it's more difficult for the paint to come through to the paper. So brush on the side, drag in from the right, horizontal lines, don't overdo it, resist the temptation to go back in to paint this again, because you're going to get some lines showing through. Where one layer has dried and then there's another layer on top, you get that line, that dividing line between the two, which you're losing that freshness to it. So that's the distant sea. Nice bright here in the middle. Now coming towards the shore, we'll go a little bit darker, going over the figures, because those figures, they're going to be darker against the lighter background. So go over those. Just a few little horizontal lines left near the shore, which can be some gentle waves coming in. Now, the next important bit, so we had the important bit of the sky and that soft edge, the distant city, the way I use the brush for the sea, and now the beach, doing a convincing sand colour. So there's all sorts of colours in this. When you observe closely a sandy beach, you're going to see all sorts of colours. So from your palette, you might be able to see typically, say, a yellow ochre, light red, maybe burnt sienna, little bits of blue as well. So the trick here is to, as I'm covering this beach area, I'm going to be constantly mixing up different colours to try and introduce that more realistic feel to it. So you can see here, I'm just picking up maybe 4 or 5 colours quickly and applying those to this area. And with that little bit of a gentle slope on the board, the paint is coming downhill. So different colours, different ratios of water to pigment. Slap in some alizarin crimson there. Yellow ochre, burnt sienna. And I can go up to, I can keep going up and fiddling about with the bits that I've done already because that's still damp. And what's going to happen now is it will have some, hopefully some subtle areas of lightness and darkness to, which I particularly want as I'm coming towards the foreground, the immediate foreground. I want those lighter and dark areas to appear because they were the little depressions in the sand where people have walked. So we're going to see that's going to be more evident coming towards us than down by the shoreline. So a little bit darker as well in the foreground. And I'm not doing horizontal strokes. It's really fairly haphazard, random, diagonal strokes, quite a lot of vertical strokes as well. Just keep mixing this colour around. I've gone over the boat shapes, doesn't matter because, like the figures, they're going to be darker. Except inside the boat. Inside the boat, they're going to be kept light. I'll be painting in those areas, but don't worry about going over the outline of the boats because they're going to be a lot darker. And of course the shadows as well. So this is slowly drying now. And before it gets dry, I'm going to be doing a little bit of lifting out with a smaller brush. Little bits, because the light's coming towards us, imagine it's almost like a, just imagine the surface, the undulating level of the surface of the beach. So those angles that are closer to, those angles that are facing the light, they're going to be lighter. And then those that are, the steeper bits that are facing us, they're going to be a little bit darker. But they're going to be mostly soft edges. So I want to go in with dark little bits. After I've done some lifting off, I'll go in with some darker marks just to make the side facing to us a little bit darker. And timing is quite important here. You've got to keep, I'm sort of continually looking at the surface and just making sure it's not drying too much and still a little bit damp. There's still a little bit of a shine to the surface. If I come down to the, if my eyes come down to the surface level and just look at it against the light, there's still just a little bit of a glimmer on it. And then we can do a little bit of a test with a smaller brush, mix some of this darker sand mixture and starting at the side, just a few little marks here and there. They're going to dry lighter. We've got a soft edge around them because this is thicker paint than the actual beach. If there was a lot of water on this brush, we'd get blooms appearing, which might be all right, but I'm going for a soft edge around these marks here, so I want it to be a little bit thicker than how I was doing the beach. So fairly random, thicker marks coming towards the foreground. As I go towards the distance, like that figure, for example, there's going to be some thinner, smaller marks. And with the same brush, I'm now just lifting off. So I wet the brush, squeeze out all of the moisture in the brush, and then just dab it across the surface there, and we can see these little lighter areas appearing, which I'll need to put some darker shadow behind them just to give more of a three-dimensional appearance to them. So over here I've added so I've got a couple of approaches here, the dark first, then lifting off, or on the right hand side, lifting off first and then add in the dark shadows afterwards. There we are, just almost you're imagining it's like a little mountain range sprawling out in front of you with these little depressions and troughs and peaks that's catching the light. And I don't want to lift off too much sand, just a little bit, ever so subtle. There we are, just a few more on the left hand side, and then mix up some shadow for the right hand side. Same brush. It's just a fairly cheap, the brush I'm using is a fairly cheap synthetic round brush. Just drop some darker shadow behind those lighter areas I've lifted out. Don't need to worry about in the middle there, that's going to be a shadow of the main boat. Now we can use some dry brush marks as well in that middle area, just to again give a sort of slightly different value and colour to the surface, just to make it a little bit more interesting so it's not too flat. And use my fingertips. It's all still wet. I can smudge it a little bit within reason. As long as what I'm smudging is, as long as I'm not damaging the beach. The beach wash now is fairly dry now, and so when I'm smudging there, I'm just really bringing out the shadow of the little troughs. A few more dry brush marks on the right hand side. Keep it light in the middle. Maybe just add a few more little marks here and there. It's important, as in most things in watercolor, not to overdo it so it becomes too fussy and potentially a little bit muddy. So this brush now is quite dry. You can see the head, it's quite flat. There's hardly anything on it at all. I'm just picking up almost dry paint from the palette, not too much moisture at all, just a little bits here and there, and then we're done. So a couple of different approaches. On the left hand side, I did the dark shadows first, then lifted off, and then on the right hand side, lifted off first, then added the dark shadows in second. What do you think came out better? I think probably the left hand side. It's to me it looks like there's softer edges on the left hand side, so probably best for me to do the dark first, then lift off second. Now, meanwhile, things in the top half of the painting are drying quite nicely, so we can now, or I can now, paint in the boats in the middle. Now, these boats, they are, what I need to do is just think of them as shapes, not as boats. If I actually paint in boats, they're going to look too perfect. Got to think of the light. When you squint your eyes and you look at the photograph, you're just seeing these boats are on top of each other and joined with each other. So they're just quick brush marks with a soft mop brush here, not too much paint. I've got a good edge, so I'm holding the brush a little bit. I've got a bit more control here. I'm holding it like a pen or a pencil, and then starting from the left, just drawing these connected shapes with not too much of a structure on the top of the boats, because that's where the light's hitting the top of the boat, so I want to keep that fairly light. Now, one in the middle. We'll have a few off of this one, another one behind it. And you see with perspective as well, I've got to be a little bit mindful of the placement of these boats going into the distance. I'm slightly higher than these boats up on the beach there. So I've got to think about their correct placement. Now, over to the right hand side, I can go a tiny bit darker with these boats. So I've kept it like a middle value in the middle. And now over the right, just a shade or two darker. There we are. Now, the far side of the bay, there's the city sprawls around the bay, but on the front here you've got some sort of cascading tiers of apartments, and I think they're mainly apartments, a few hotels there, but these tiers, these terraces, going down to the promenade that goes all the way around the bay. So just a few little lines there. It's in the distance. We don't want to be too detailed, but it's a question of their buildings. It's not like a mountain or a cliff. They're structures. Now, I did say earlier I was going to use white paint very sparingly, but I think I will need a tiny bit of white paint just to emphasize some of those terraces, those balconies. Paint the boats now, starting from the left. Just that's the inside of that left-hand boat, and keep it fairly loose, not too detailed. Also, with these boats, you want to make sure that along the gunnels, along the top of the boat, it's not too smooth, not too perfect, because you get little objects appearing on the top of these boats for rigging, for where the oars might go. So they're not perfect. So painting them in a loose way is the best way to go. And we don't need to be too careful about a smooth line around the gunnels. Now, this boat, I want to go, again, there's lots of different colours in it that I can see, and generally I'll be a little bit light towards the top, but then go a bit darker down towards the bottom, and the shadow that's going to go out to the left. So thinking about the light in the middle, and these shadows will sort of radiate out, which will, I think, be quite a pleasing pattern. Hard edge there on the right hand side, hard edge on the left. So I really have simplified the scene with these boats. If I never try to, especially now, I never try to copy a photograph. Let's just check the edge of the brush there. Never try to copy a photograph, but just try and, there's a few little objects over on the left hand side, could be anything. Something belonging to a party of people maybe sat on that side of the boat. Now, very important shadow of this boat, and the edge won't be perfect because the edge is hitting the rough surface of the beach, so I've got to follow the contour of these little depressions on the beach. And we'll connect this boat with that figure, the figure sitting down. So I'll mix up some flesh colour first, and with a slightly smaller brush here, paint in face, arms, knees, legs, lower part of the legs. But because we're painting Contre Jour here, we're looking into the light, we've just got quite a simple silhouette to deal with, and makes it, life is a lot simpler when you're painting in this way. Now, like the boat, I'll introduce some different values, so a little bit lighter at the top, and then it doesn't matter if I just leave little bits. So there's me connecting to the boat behind, so they're sort of joined up a little bit rather than sitting in isolation. Now the legs of the chair, or this whatever seating this figure is on, and then shadow, join up, shadow joins up these legs and the figure's legs. But again, like the boat, it's the actual edge of the shadow is all over the place. Few little lines there which will be some kind of post or something that we'll have. Now, let's have a lady either walking towards us or walking away from us, I'm not sure what, and down to the legs. Now, this figure is probably the most important figure because I've got to paint in these legs. I want to give it a sense of movement as well. So one leg, painting wise, one leg is a little bit shorter than the other, and then the shadow. Now, as I do these shadows, light in the middle, so these shadows are still, because that figure's on the left, the actual angle of the shadow going out slightly to the left. Middle boat, inside of the boat. Now, as it's a little bit further away, the inside of the boat was just a line, just a simple line, and this boat's a little bit lighter in value than the first boat. I go a tiny bit darker down towards the bottom, and then shadow. Paint carefully along the boat, the side of the boat that's in front of it, that I'm going to keep fairly light, and shadow there, a few verticals just to indicate how the boat is supported. All important middle boat, very loose way of doing the inside of the boat, bit of a quirky stern of the boat, and then the inside. Nothing too fancy. And now the actual hull of the boat. Give this one a bit of a yellow ochre touch. So splash that in near the bow of the boat, and careful line around the gunnels to the back of the boat, and bring it down. Now go darker here, darker, so it's all one. I'm painting the boat hulls and the shadow all done in one, so it's a nice soft transition between the two. Because this is Contre Jour, we can't exactly see where the bottom of the boat is because it's the same value as the shadow. Right, fairly erratic edge of the shadow of the boat. Just take the brush back into the hull. It's all still quite wet. Now, need to be a bit careful on the right-hand edge. So this shadow's almost coming towards us. and then the boat on the right hand side will be just ever so slightly going out to the right hand, go off in the right hand direction. Simple figure behind the boat, a bit darker than the boat. Hold the brush fairly carefully so I can be a bit more precise with this figure. And then stopping just behind the boat, so I've got the white of the back of the boat. So I'm adding in these darker areas now, these darker objects, figures and boats, and that's hopefully emphasizing that light that's coming from the middle of the painting. Right hand boat, simple inside, the hull. I need to paint around that object I was mentioning when I was drawing that sort of square thing. I don't know what it is, but I just thought that needs something over there. Maybe it balances the figure, the sat down figure, this object that I'm going to be painting around now. That's the top. Could be a bin, or I don't know, maybe something where people that own their boats, they put their rigging or something. Shadows over to the right, just a little bit, which will just emphasize the direction of the light. And this square thing. I'm doing this exactly the same as the boats, light at the top, fairly watery, go thicker and darker with the shadow straight away, and we get a soft transition from one to the other. I'm well into the detail stage of the painting, as I would call it. So we've done the drawing, we've done the initial wash, we've added in the darks, the shadows, and now, as I do in a lot of my paintings, now get into the detail stage. So generally a smaller brush, add in little bits of the rigging and the masts, and perhaps a bit more detail on some of the figures. So back to this smaller detail brush. Just think about that white patch I left on the far side. That could have been made into a building. I know that there probably wasn't a building there, but that could have been maybe the vertical face of a building. Anyway, it's going to become a flag now. Put in a Spanish flag, as it's Spain. Boats always become a bit more convincing when you do a line across the top of the hull. So it's a dry brush mark generally that I use, fairly thick paint. So let's have a dark one there. I just picked up some neutral tint from the palette. Little point on the bow. Yeah, little bits and pieces on that boat and some posts, just dry brush marks, quickly done. And because we're looking against the light, those vertical lines, they need to be a dry brush mark is the best way to go. The brush I'm using now has got a fairly good point to it, so I can be quite precise with the detail and the thickness of the lines. Let's give this lady a costume. There we go. Perhaps a second line on that one. I need to do the main boat here. And this line emphasizes the curve of the boat as well. There, just dry brush mark over to the left hand side, or on the right hand side, right in boat there. I forgot another figure. Let's sneak one in here. This one is a little bit closer to the shoreline, so because the beach just dips a little bit from the level here, just dips down towards the shoreline, the head of this one is going to be lower than the other two figures, so that emphasizes that little bit of a dip down to the water's edge. Normally, of course, all the figures would be, the heights, the tops of the heads of the figures would be pretty much level. Need to paint in that Spanish flag. I don't need to be too detailed because it's blowing in the wind, we're looking against the light, so it's just going to be a fairly simple shape, and get in the two red lines, and then a little bit of a yellow between the two. There we are, a loose Spanish flag. Now I do use a little bit of white paint towards the end just to pick up on a few details, highlights. And this will be done with a small brush with a good point. Just a little dot on the top of that guy's head, perhaps something on the arm of the chair, the female figure, this guy here behind the boat. It's not going to show up too much because I've painted that against a lighter background, but those posts will show up a little bit more. So just exploiting the darker clouds behind. And as I said earlier, just a few little marks picking up the balconies of some of the and tops of the buildings in the distance. And a few lights and things catching the sunlight in the distance as well. A few little dots on the beach, not too much. And there we are. So this is the end painting, the Playa de las Canteras in Las Palmas, Gran Canaria, Spain, and Contre Jour. But the key thing I wanted to try and cover in this video is you don't necessarily need masking fluid. Other people might have used masking fluid maybe for bits of the water and the boats as well, just so that when they go over the wash they can go straight over that boat and don't need to worry about it. But I was doing a little bit of careful negative painting and some dry brush marks just to as an alternative. So you don't necessarily need masking fluid. You can get away with it. But the sequence was the initial drawing, getting everything right, thinking about the composition, the balance. For example, the balance of the figure here and the box over here as well, thinking about that. The placement of the boats, where I was going to have the lighter area in the middle of the composition. And with the placement of the light, we've got these, being in the middle, we've got these lovely little radial lines of shadows coming out, all right? So I started by adding in, with my painting, I started adding in a light layer of clear water. I say light, it was clear water, no paint in it, clear water right across the middle of the scene there. And then dropping in, starting in the top right corner, dropping in these bands of clouds. We've got in there lots of different values and a little, what watercolor does, look at that, some granulation that's appearing there, and these marks as well. Without too much effort, watercolor does those lovely things for you. Then, when that was still quite damp, that sky, those clouds, I dropped in the sort of base colour of the far buildings, the city that's going around the bay. And then starting with the sea, fairly light, dry brush marks, side of the brush, rather than the tip of the brush, side of the brush, so the water, the paint's not, the paint has more difficulty to come out. And we're just scraping it from left to right in there, and then right to left over there into the middle, and not overdoing it at all. And then the beach, trying to alternate, first of all, observing the beach. What colours do you see? And not sticking with one colour, alternating different colours and values. Things are going to dry lighter. And then my two different approaches for creating these little depressions on a sandy beach. So on the left-hand side, dark, a darker value first, and then lift off little bits there. And then the right-hand side, I lift it off first, and then add in the dark afterwards. So I've got, actually, the way I did it, I've got harder lines appearing on the right-hand side. I don't know whether that was intentional, but that's how it's occurred. And then Importantly, adding in the boats, the darks, that really does start to make the whole scene appear a lot brighter when we add in these boats. So those middle ones, fairly light in value, just sort of loose brush marks. I mean, when we go into these brush marks, you know, that one there looks like a boat maybe, but these are just almost rectangles. You know, just little rectangles, but join them together as well. Okay, and then the boats, fairly simple, and the boat and the shadow done as one. Darker shadow than the boat, nice dry brush marks across the top of the hull, and these figures, keep them simple, silhouetted shapes. These standing figures behind that boat, don't need to worry about the legs, so these were the only legs I needed to bother about, that one there. And yeah, just really some final touches with a small detail brush, these posts. Mustn't forget the Spanish flag there, and just a few little marks here and there, just really, again, not trying to overdo it. You must know when to stop. And then a little bit of white paint just to bring up just a few details, again, not overdoing it. So there you are. Hope you liked it. Catch up with you next time. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.